With the deadline of the Great Hybrid Tournament ending very soon, I thought I would look at the competition so far and see how well my hybrid Meena does against them. Now, it's pointing out that I don't know every single competitor off the heart. Some I will know more of than others, but I'm going to be covering mainly some of the main ones and the most popular ones, as I feel like those are going to be the ones that will actually get into the tournament. Also, I am not going to be saying the genomes of the hybrids because the creators already have dedicated videos or posts or both detailing all the things you need to know about the hybrids. And if I told that information, it would take like a million years to finish this video. So I would mainly just looking at the hybrids, seeing if they work, if they have any issues, and more importantly, their chances of beating my hybrid. Barry I have kind of a soft spot for because he was the first ever hybrid that I saw in the tournament. He's changed a bit since we first saw him, but he still remains simple but effective. However, being less than 2 tons, and also not being specified to work as a group, means that this guy is going up against my 22-ton elephant alone. Doesn't seem very fair. Fortress, at first glance, looks like a very impressive hybrid, but the Doedicurus shell, the Dunkleosteus head armour, and the Arapaima scales covering the rest of the body, on a hippo of all things, just screams of this guy going the way of Behemoth. Because mammals produce a lot more body heat than a reptile, which means that this copious amount of armour is going to lead to the hybrid cooking itself. And that also doesn't take away from other issues, which we'll get into later, involving certain breathing mechanics not working. So in other words, Fortress gets hanked. Bob is definitely one of the more unique creatures in the competition, as his main form of attack, his claws, are really his only form of attack. The head and spiked tongue from the woodpecker aren't really going to do a whole lot against Meena. And also, while those claws might be impressive, it's not really going to do much against a 22-ton elephant. Even with those echidna spikes, which might protect it from the top, but not from below. Meena has a set strategy for larger opponents, which will be revealed later. But with this thing being on its own, that's not going to help it. Even if he was allowed multiple bobs, it still wouldn't help. Myalis is a powerful pig, but 12 tons seems a bit heavy for a pig. I know that they may have also contributed leg strength from the Paleoloxodon, but I feel like this hybrid is at the size it is, which means it can only be allowed one of them against Meena. It's not going to be a very fair fight, I'll just say that. It's functional, just not very fair. Primatus Rex 2.0 is another functional hybrid, but to be honest, it almost feels too simple. There's nothing really protecting this hybrid. There wasn't no specifications of it working with others. And also, the Jaguar bite force is going to be slightly compromised due to the ape-like traits from the Gigantopithecus, meaning its bite might be a bit more compromised. Brutalis is our first real serious contestant. The first one that could really put up a fight against Meena and possibly win. However, I feel like Meena would still be able to win more times, due to a few simple factors, not down to the contributors because there aren't really any issues with it, but it comes down to the fight. See, this creature has longer legs, whilst Meena is relatively bulkier and also heavier. The longer legs means that Brutalis could get toppled over easier, leaving access to the underbelly, which is sort of Meena's strategy for dealing with larger opponents, using her tusks and trunk as a sort of like a disjointed hitbox to grapple them, throw them down, before ramming the tusks into the underbelly, because a lot of hybrids still aren't perfectly armoured all around. So I feel like that could be a definite strategy that gives me the win. Moda is... oh, where do I start? I mean, aside from the fact that this is a really cool design, and one of my favourites in the competition, this thing could definitely put up a fight against Meena, if it didn't have multiple flaws. See, contrary to what people might believe, the limpet does not spread Go Fight to the armour and claws. They only have Go Fight teeth, so that's all it'll reinforce. Because that bite might be deadly, but also the armour on this creature isn't exactly the best. Using the Greenland shark for its toxic flesh wasn't a smart idea, considering how different sharks get rid of waste from other animals. See, sharks don't have a typical urinary system. They end up concentrating a lot of their urine in their blood and then releasing it through the skin, which is how their skin tastes so bad. But since this creature has a traditional urinary system, I mean, likely, I'm not judging, it likely won't have access to this toxic flesh, and also being armoured with both Arapaima scales and shark denticles. Both have the problem of drying out on land without being constantly submerged in water. Quite a few hybrids have this problem. No, the scales dry out ridiculously fast outside of water. I mean, why do you think fish don't last long out of water? It's not just because of air. So yeah, Moda, I feel like, could definitely work, but its armour isn't exactly going to stop Meena's tusks from just impaling it. Akapura, one of the big ones in the tournament, probably the first real serious entry that was put out. So, starting off with, this hybrid, even with the 2.0 version, it's far from perfect. See, one of the big issues I have with Akapura was actually very recently. It recently got a big weight increase to 13 tons, which I don't really understand. The largest ankylosaur tipped out about around 8 tons, and I highly doubt the shell and the extra spikes can justify another 5 tons in weight. Also, taking ankylosaurs for its efficient breathing system, here's a little thing to dampen the mood. Ankylosaurs don't have air sacs. Not every dinosaur had air sacs. They're not a universal trait. They only evolved, as far as we know, in theropods and sauropods. And even then, they evolved for completely different reasons. Other ornithischian dinosaurs, like ankylosaurs, lacked these kinds of air sacs. But then again, the bones might still be stronger thanks to the ankylosaurus. So Akapura 2.0 would definitely be able to function at a reduced weight, but 13 tons, this thing is going to be way too heavy and could possibly risk breaking its own legs. Just saying. Now moving on to the Umbrafelis, which at first glance seems like a pretty perfect hybrid and one that I was legit worried about at first, but after doing some digging I realised I had nothing to fear. If you look very closely, you can't really see it very well, but there are gills on its neck. Yes, gills on a land animal. I already don't need to explain why that's a bad idea, but I will. Essentially, animal brains haven't really evolved to process breathing mechanisms from both a fish and a tetrapod. So essentially, this creature needs a lot of oxygen to survive, but its oxygen intake will be greatly reduced thanks to the gills being there, since no land animal actually has gills. There's also other concerns about the whole Arapaima scale thing, which we discussed previously, and also the lionfish fins possibly stinging itself, which might be a problem, especially with the stonefish venom. I highly doubt the opossum and crocodilian immune system is going to be enough to counteract that. Umbrafelis also has another problem regarding its blood and its breathing, which a lot of hybrids have problems with. This is a problem that recurs for a shocking amount of hybrids in the competition, but I'll get into it later. Clober is sort of like Akapura, but a lot better. The only real criticism I have for him is that his breathing mechanism, like I mentioned before, wouldn't really affect him, but given his lighter weight, it should be enough that will allow him to survive. But then again, Meena would probably have an easier time against a bunch of Clobers than an Akapura, since they're not spiky all over. And they're also not armoured underneath, so she can just flip them over and just stab them. Fluffy's fight can be summarised in a single word. Squish. They're done, moving on. Breby was a hybrid that I feel like I definitely inspired with Meena, but I feel like Meena's definitely a bit more optimised. Starting with, those oryx horns are not going to hit anything. They're such a weird angle that they can't be brought down to be used as an offensive lance-like weapon like the tusks, and they're also too short to reach across the creature's back should anything climb on it. But another big problem is things like the air sacs from the bar-headed goose, because I don't think that air sacs would necessarily work well on a mammal, could compromise its own breathing. Also, it uses orca for its myoglobin and higher intelligence, even though the elephants in the genome could have already provided sufficient intelligence. And once again, that whole myoglobin and hemoglobin thing, we will get into that later, don't worry. Thanatos is in a similar boat to Brutalis, a strong, powerful hybrid that can definitely put up a good fight and possibly win. But I feel like Meena could still win with the same strategy that she did with Brutalis. Topple it over, and then stab its underbelly. Khan is definitely a functional crocodilian, but still has a few issues, like with it being very low to the ground. Meena's vitals are far off its reach, which means you'll only really be able to grab the legs or the trunk. But also, this creature could still be just easily flipped over and stabbed. Basilisk was a bit of an interesting one, as it was supposed to be submitted to the first ever Great Hybrid War by Goji Center, and looking at the genome, you can definitely tell this was a first attempt at a hybrid. It suffers from a couple of flaws, like the harpy eagle being used to strengthen the length of the claws on the front limbs, despite the fact that the eagle talons are located on the back limbs. And also, the Stegosaurus Thagomizer could lead to a heavier tail, leading it dragging behind it, which wouldn't really work very well. So I feel like Meena could still definitely beat this guy. Ikalwa is a definite challenge for Meena, considering it's basically a giraffe and very spiky, so Meena may struggle to grapple with it. But it's still smaller and lighter than her, so she should still be able to flip her over using brute force alone. And also, those feet pads should hopefully protect her from any spiky quills when trampling her or using her tusks to stab it. I don't want to take credit for starting the whole bioaccurate futures wild creatures. I mean, I made a bioaccurate Windrunner, Sharkopath, and Falconfly. Now I got this person who is probably low-key obsessed with me and definitely doesn't speak English as their first language. I'm the only one who's brave enough to point that out. They've now made a bioaccurate Karakiller. A Terror Bird in general I feel like is not going to be very useful in this hybrid competition. There are no problems with the hybrid, but it barely weighs more than the allowed weight limit, meaning a group of these would weigh just over a ton. Meena's not going to have any issues with this. Diablo is a very cool looking hybrid. It's definitely a very unique challenge for Meena, and this is one of the hybrids that I honestly don't know too much about. So I'm not entirely sure of a lot of its things, but I feel like, judging from it, its limbs aren't exactly made to support its sheer weight. Animals that weigh more than 10 tons, like this guy does, have to have specialized collar pillar-like limbs that allow them to support their weight. This creature doesn't have that. Its limbs are still relatively spread out and not full column-like. So I feel like maybe it would risk of collapsing its own legs, but then again, that's just me saying that because I'm not fully sure on this creature's genome and all of its abilities. Now, I had to memorize a lot of hybrids before this. Some of them are going to be more detailed than others. But still, I feel like Meena should still be able to defeat this one. Larry uses Bombardier Beetle. Enough said. Any creature that uses Bombardier Beetle in any capacity is going to get hanked. Andy is a very interesting case, as it essentially just looks like a regular hippo. It kind of reminds me of Nyx from Bruce's Battles. Looked like a regular old orca, but a lot of internal stuff made it a hybrid. It sort of reminds me of my own hybrid in a way, as they share a lot of contributors. That being said, real life elephants can take on groups of hippos without a challenge, so I feel like the same rule could apply here. Pythor is definitely a functional snake, but there's a reason why I didn't send Gary into the tournament instead. A snake isn't necessarily the best creature to be using in this tournament. Also, the length of 49 meters. The longest contributor is Titanoboa. So yeah, just let that sink in. I feel like this creature is way too crazy unable to constrict anything, and its venom also isn't going to work because there are many creatures that will be immune to the venom that it can produce. The Iron Giant was made by LEGO Monster vs. Rex, who definitely, as for being the main drawer of hybrids for quite a few people, you'd think he'd be a good hybrid maker. There's a difference between being a good hybrid drawer and a good hybrid maker. This guy would have some problems. The main one being the risk of breaking its own neck, because even with the increased neck muscles, normal rams don't actually need to support extra set of tusks, horns, a frill, and multiple spikes. This thing is going to break its own neck, and also suffer from overheating and possible poking itself due to all the spikes across its body. There being practically nowhere for the heat to vent out, especially with the horns blocking the ears. Caesar's similar to both Brutalis and Thanatos, but I feel like slightly worse off due to the ram horns. In a similar problem to the Iron Giant, those horns will grow constantly, meaning that unless they can get broken off, then they're going to go back into their head and kill them. So yeah, other than that, there isn't really too many problems with Caesar, but Meena could probably still win the same way she did with the other similar hybrids like him. Olli was specifically made to combat Meena, but I feel like Meena still comes out on top. Because there's still concerns over the actual neck muscles, this creature may not be able to lift its head as well as Meena. And also, those mammoth tusks are curved in a way which they're not really going to be useful for impaling other creatures. Meena's tusks are not as curved as that. And also, the vampire bat was kind of unnecessary, given the fact that they added short-tailed shrew later. And with the tusks being teeth, it would still spread iron across them like any other animal. So vampire bat was kind of unnecessary, but they do them, I guess. And Meena probably will still win. Ultimium Rex, being made by Parasite Genetic Tech, you wouldn't think has any issues. But I found two. First of all, the Doedicurus tail may be useful as a weapon if it had the instincts to use it. See, Doedicurus, Apatosaurus, and the crocodile may use their tails as weapons, but most of the genome doesn't. Its instincts on how to fight with its tail are going to be messed with. It can also just be grabbed by Meena. Parasite Genetic Tech was right to worry about the large elephants, because they could definitely beat this creature. But by far the worst thing about this, and many other hybrids, is using marine mammals like seals for various contributors for the blood and the breathing. This was done as an attempt to conserve energy, make them better at it, but it actually does the opposite. See, marine mammals like seals, their organs in general end up beating a lot slower due to the fact that they are usually very inactive when diving, because they need to conserve energy. Using more energy, being more active underwater means you waste more air. This trait doesn't necessarily correlate to a land creature, especially larger ones. The bigger and more powerful you are, the stronger your heart needs to be to pump blood throughout your body. So, the blood needs to be travelling relatively quick throughout the body, which, leading to these marine mammals, they also have thicker blood than regular mammals. Which means the blood will be travelling slower through the arteries. It won't be able to get to places it needs to be quick enough. Which, I don't want to say it will cause a clog, but if it does, that's just another bad thing why you shouldn't be using this. So I do not recommend using seals or marine mammals for their hemoglobin, myoglobin, organs, or stuff like that. Although other than that, this creature doesn't really have any problems. It could definitely put up a fight if it had the energy for it. But I don't want to say this whole pinniped, hemoglobin, myoglobin stuff will hank it, because I don't think it will. But it will still significantly reduce its energy in combat. Which means Meena will definitely be able to pull off a win against a much tireder opponent. Dumbo seemingly has no problems, except for the fact they use humpback whale for its organs and its ribcage. And I already went into detail on why this was a bad idea, so I don't need to go into it again. But at this point, using it for the organs as well means Goji Headquarters learned nothing from Samson, and Dumbo gets hanked. I know a lot of people were waiting for this one. The Orc Dog, at first glance, seems like a perfect hybrid, and one that would be genuinely frightening for anyone to fight against. Except for a problem that I found with it, regarding its venom. See, Its venom is made to be used for a special gland on its arm that it activates with its saliva. But its saliva is also venomous, which could potentially lead to this creature poisoning itself. And the opossum immune system, while useful for protecting against various snake venoms, this is the venom implications of something like the shrew and the vampire bat. Also, mixing together the 3 different venoms of the shrew, the bat, and the slow loris means this creature's metabolic needs are going to go into overdrive, possibly leading to its self-destruction. But also, another thing this thing has is its pain tolerance, which was meant to be increased due to its naked mole rat DNA. But not being able to feel pain isn't necessarily a good thing. There is an actual medical condition where people don't feel pain, and it's not the blessing you think it is. Most of the time, these people end up dying due to conditions they didn't even know they had because they can't feel pain, so they didn't have no idea nothing was wrong with them until they've already been murdered by it. Which could lead to these creatures fighting beyond their capabilities, causing them to become much more exerted, and therefore much easier to beat, because each of these doggies weighs only 1 ton, so they can still get easily taken out as individuals. So they could end up pushing themselves beyond their physical limits, which animals do not do, by the way. They're not maniacal killers that will fight till every last breath. They have limits. And some of these things may help with other hybrids later down the line on this list. Tank is essentially Akapura, but I feel like might be honestly slightly worse than the original Akapura. You know, its longer legs means it could be toppled over easier, and its spikes are much thicker, meaning it's much easier for Meena to grapple and manipulate them. Because if any of these turtles get flipped over, it's going to be pretty much game over. Johnston, being a large lizard hybrid, doesn't really seemingly have many issues. But then again, another hybrid that I don't really know too much about. Same thing with Tank and Diablo, so I'm more or less just going to skip this one. Fist-chewed is exactly the main reason why I was thinking of using animals' different own instincts against them, which Meena can do, due to her being an elephant and being pretty smart. First of all, that whole seal mechanics, internal mechanics for its hemoglobin, myoglobin stuff, that's not going to work, as I mentioned earlier. But also, the main thing holding Fist-chewed back is his poor eyesight. See, rhinos have very bad vision. They're unable to really visualize what is more than a few yards in front of them. Even if this hybrid is more social than rhinos, the inability to tell what the enemy is may cause it to still turn on its friends, which would be very bad news. Also, Meena can use this to her advantage by throwing things at them, causing them to scare them, and they may likely end up running away from a fight which they could end up standing a decent chance in if not for the whole pinniped systems inside it, which still holds it back greatly. Finally, we have Leonidas, Valus Stredmir's hybrid that is definitely making it into the tournament. Now, I don't really have much to comment on this guy because we don't really fully know exactly what's in his genome. We know all the contributors, we don't know what each thing provides. We can just assume. And I assume Meena can still win this fight, because in real life, elephants can take on up to 20 lions. You can find a video on YouTube of an elephant taking on 20 lions, and the elephant still wins. And with there being only 5 lions, in this case, Meena stands a much better chance, because these might be hybrid lions, but I also have a hybrid elephant, much stronger than the real thing, so I feel like Meena can still win. This video wasn't just me just glazing over my hybrid saying that she's the best, because I mentioned that there were still a few hybrids that definitely stand a chance of beating her. So this is where luck comes in, and the luck of where you actually get put up against a decent opponent that allows you to basically get a free pass to the next round. So, yeah, and also, I specifically made the video on this day because, being the last day of submissions, it'll be too late for anyone to fix the changes that they'll need to make. Because, I'm intelligent. I could have just told everyone their hybrid's weaknesses straight away, but I didn't, because I knew that then they'd fix them. Sometimes you have to be a little ruthless in a competition. Everyone for themselves. Hopefully, I didn't make too many enemies by saying this, but I still wish everyone the very best of luck in the tournament. You're gonna need it.